Vou começar por dizer good morning to our invited speakers. Buenas tardes para todos os que nos acompanham. Boa tarde para todos os que estão em linha connosco no mundo. Eu quero felicitar a organização deste seminário, deste webinar. I will follow my introduction in Portuguese. Eu apresento uma palavra de felicitações para todos os que contribuíram para a possibilidade da realização deste seminário, muito em particular porque isto significa a dinâmica desta rede e a dinâmica da construção do pensamento de todos nós investigadores, mas particularmente daquilo que são os nossos grupos de trabalho, que nós representamos de alguma forma, e é o pensamento naquilo que é uma grande preocupação hoje em dia, que é a antecipação da cultura digital, ou a construção da cultura digital, como uma cultura de inovação. Preocupa-me sobretudo, e porque estamos numa universidade digital, e o mundo organiza-se numa rede, ou num universo digital, preocupa-me sobretudo a forma como construímos o conhecimento, antes disso a forma como organizamos as aprendizagens e a forma como construímos o conhecimento neste mundo digital, em particular porque sabemos que 65% das crianças que iniciam os seus estudos hoje em dia vão trabalhar em profissões que não existem hoje. Esta penso que deve ser a nossa preocupação maior. Aquilo que é o nosso pensamento para a construção curricular é posto em questão, ou antes deve ser observado num outro contexto, que é este. A cultura da educação digital deve ser observada neste novo enquadramento. E aquilo que para mim é mais importante é perceber como é que se constrói este conhecimento enquanto forma de cidadania, uma cidadania que é também a expressão de uma voz cultural e, através dessa voz cultural, a expressão da soberania. Não há soberania sem conhecimento. Isto é muito importante para nós numa universidade digital, porque nós estamos para além da fronteira, do território, de uma geografia próxima feita pela linha da fronteira ou pela linha do território. A rede, por definição, não conhece territórios. E, sobretudo, o pensamento também não pode conhecer territórios. E a voz social deve ser uma voz que permita construir a autonomia, a liberdade da construção do conhecimento. E eu penso que este ciclo de palestras tem, nas suas diferentes realizações, desde a internet na vida cotidiana, as problemáticas da literacia e da inclusão, as questões de boas práticas na inclusão digital, a alfabetização e inovação, a cidadania digital, que é a problemática contemporânea de hoje, aquilo que nos preocupa hoje. A cidadania é feita através de uma participação plena. E participação plena supõe um equilíbrio, uma cultura, uma ecologia. E eu acho que, sobretudo, o nosso grande desafio está em conseguir ter um outro pensamento que saia do cenário fechado ou do enquadramento típico que é um cenário, onde vemos uma escola, uma formação e todo um olhar que habitualmente fica limitado a um espaço, a um cenário, para passarmos para uma nova abordagem, não de cenários, mas de contextos. São dinâmicos, não têm limites, não se deixam prender àquilo que é uma geografia de um território de pensamento, mas, pelo contrário, são capazes de interagir com todos os territórios e, desse modo, fazer ou desenvolver uma fluidez. Não é exatamente a sociedade líquida do Zygmunt Bauman, mas é próximo, tem muito a ver com isso. Há, de facto, no digital um sentido de liquidez, mas isso não significa uma perda de independência, a meu ver. Pelo contrário, significa que nós estamos à procura de uma outra forma de identidade de uma outra forma de promover a expansão da comunidade que temos atualmente e que conhecemos atualmente, porque nós neste momento, neste ciclo de palestras, estamos a construir uma comunidade para além daquilo que é habitual. E é isto que estamos a aprender a fazer. É isto que estamos a aprender a construir e deste modo a viver. E a viver numa forma de representação, representar o conhecimento deste outro modo. Sendo capaz de o partilhar em rede, sendo capaz de o construir colaborativamente, sendo capaz de o transformar num projeto conversacional, mas sobretudo ser capaz de o transformar num projeto coletivo. Eu poderia continuar e daqui a pouco estava a fazer uma palestra, não era esse o meu objetivo. O meu objetivo é só dar as boas-vindas a todos os presentes, particularmente àqueles que vão desenvolver agora a tarefa de apresentar as suas intervenções e connosco partilharem o seu pensamento, mas todos aqueles outros que irão também acompanhar e, através de uma discussão alargada, permitir-nos construir este pensamento coletivo. A Universidade Aberta de Portugal tem o maior orgulho em estar nesta iniciativa, em acolher esta iniciativa, particularmente porque esta rede está assediada no Laboratório de Educação à Distância da Universidade, mas mais em particular porque estamos a comemorar 30 anos de educação à distância. E com 30 anos de educação à distância são já uma enorme responsabilidade para todos nós. Portanto, não é exatamente o começo, é já um momento em que nós passamos por um conjunto muito vasto de tecnologias, passamos das fases do ensino à distância como uma autoaprendizagem para a fase do ensino à distância como um processo colaborativo, de partilha, conversacional, de inovação, particularmente orientado para a promoção de uma cultura de inovação. Com isto quero terminar. A cultura de inovação é talvez o maior desafio para conseguirmos construir uma cidadania. É o maior desafio porque é através dessa cultura de inovação que eu terei instrumentos para ter uma inclusão ou para fazer parte claramente da sociedade da amanhã. E para isso eu tenho que ser capaz de refletir sobre a escola que temos hoje, do currículo que temos que construir, transformar numa estrutura dinâmica, precisamente para preparar esse futuro, o amanhã. E a escola, no seu sentido coletivo, significa desde os primeiros anos à universidade, e a universidade que tem que continuar ao longo da vida na formação das pessoas. Não há mais um tempo de formação único, há um tempo de formação permanente, continuado, numa sociedade dinâmica, onde aquilo que temos também é uma alteração do tempo. O tempo não é que tenha diminuído, o tempo mudou. A espessura do tempo, a percepção do tempo mudou. E essa percepção de mudança do tempo obriga-nos naturalmente a ter uma outra forma de estar, de pensarmos as nossas organizações e de percebermos como é que elas vão estar também no tempo. Permitam-me concluir agradecendo a presença de todos, agradecendo mais uma vez a organização deste encontro e desejar a todos os melhores trabalhos e com esta partilha de ideias uma forma de construirmos um pensamento para o futuro, para anteciparmos o futuro, porque o futuro é aquilo que estamos a construir hoje, o que queremos construir hoje. Muito obrigado a todos.
Obrigada, professor Paulo Dias. Thank you for your intervention. Muchas gracias por su participación y por las interesantes ideas que nos deja. And now it is my pleasure to yield the floor to Professor Joe Straubhaar. Professor Joe Straubhaar is the Eamon G. Carter Centennial Professor of Communication in the Radio, Television, Film Department and Director of Latino and Latin American Media Studies Program at the University of Texas at Austin. His current research concerns the global television in Brazil and Latin America, the digital divide in Brazil and Texas, and so on. He is author and co-author of several books and numerous journal articles, and also conference papers on these topics. Thank you, Professor Straubhaar, for being with us.
So, again, I'm happy to, I guess I will primarily speak in English, but I'm very happy to respond to questions in Portuguese, or for that matter, speak in Portuguese. I've lived almost more than that, 5 or 6 years in Brazil, and spent now quite a bit of time in Portugal as well on various projects. So the thing that interests me in the digital divide, just as we begin to get into it, the US takes a largely economic view of the digital divide. We see it as a barrier toward people's economic participation. But as the rector has said, in many ways it's a barrier also toward broader social and civic participation, because as we saw in our last election, much of the discussion, much of the interaction, much of the building of people's intention to vote and their decisions about what to do in our election were based on social media or other new digital forms. And so these media have evolved so quickly, as we saw in our election, that sometimes participants that we thought were part of the US public were actually agents of Russia or other places. And so it's a very challenging new world. But the thing I have been, I think, worried about mostly is how to help people get into that world. So where I wanted to start was the things that contribute to a digital divide, because the world is very unequal in this. I'm currently writing a book about this progression of television in Latin America up through the entrance of Netflix and the impact that Netflix is having on TV. And it's already quite striking. I just saw a recent report from Brazil where TV Globo is still the #1 TV, but the #2 is now the combination of cable and new digital streaming TV. And the other TV stations are after that. And in fact, several of them are now, in fact, the #2 TV station now makes less money than Netflix. And so it's a new digital world in many ways. But in Brazil, for instance, maybe 60% of people participate in the digital world on the internet, but maybe only 20% actually have broadband at home. So the place I kind of wanted to start was by thinking, primarily in the United States, we tend to start thinking about digital inclusion at the point of access. How many people have access? And when I look particularly at research that we've done in Austin, either with the general public or particularly a recent research we did with people in public housing who are among the poorest people in Austin. So this slide, for instance, talks about people in public housing, which is a good sample of the poor. So the people who are less likely to have internet at home are women, African Americans, people who are single as opposed to parents, the less educated and the unemployed, people who are less likely to use internet. Because in Austin, almost 90, as a recent survey that I'm working on with the city to examine who has internet, 93% of Austin people have internet at home, which is much higher than the United States in total, where it's more like, 83, 84, 85%, depending exactly on how you look at it. And so one of the things we noticed in Austin in various studies is a number of people actually live in homes with internet access, including broadband, but the older they are, the less educated they are, the less likely they are to use it. So there's a problem of access, there's a problem of use, and then there's a problem of literacy. And we've been looking at literacy in various ways, and I want to come back to that because I personally am kind of thinking about literacy with a couple of different conceptualizations. One is digital literacy. Another would be the capabilities that people have. And another, I would, in a more theoretical way, building on Bourdieu, might be to think of this as technological capital. Ways, the capitals that we now have in the technological area, which permit us to have or don't have or not social mobility in much of the same way as cultural capital at a more basic level works. So when we look at who lacks that digital literacy, tends to be older people, more men than women, interestingly enough, particularly among the poor. I mean, we have a notion in general that men are more included in the digital world, but when you get among those who are less educated and less socially advantaged, at least in the United States, women have actually been making greater strides than men, in part because some of the entry-level jobs for people in the digital society, such as secretarial or clerk or office people, are open to women maybe more than to men. And so it's interesting to see, given that work is one of the places where people acquire their digital literacy, when women are recruited into basic jobs, they then in some ways have more of a chance to learn digital literacy than working class or less educated men. So when one of the other things I wanted to bring up, so a Dutch colleague, Jan van Wijk, has talked about in order to conceptualize the digital inclusion or digital divides, we think of access, we think of kind of expectations, or what Bourdieu might call disposition. You know, what do people think that they're going to be able to get out of investing time, energy, and money into getting into the digital world? And so we have to also think not only about capabilities and knowledge and skills, but expectations. And we've noticed in surveys, particularly with the poor, that older adults, disabled people, single people, and I meant, interestingly, the result of single people, I think, is that in many ways, families think that they need to have access to the digital world for their children. But poorer single people are less concerned with that. And people who are unemployed, people who are less fluent in English, less involved in US society in the English mainstream. And one of the things I've been focusing on, and I think a lot of people here have, is the important role of people as parents in helping bring their children into the digital era, although sometimes that reverses and children gain digital skills before poorer and less educated parents, and those parents find themselves learning from their children. But overall, one of our bigger problems in the United States, and I suspect it's true in Portugal, it's certainly true in Brazil, that increasingly schools expect children to have digital accesses and digital knowledge so that they can do homework, do research, write papers, etc., with digital tools. And it's a place where the lack of access is now hurting poor families in the US very badly. They don't have simply the access, the internet access, or the computers to permit their children to keep up in school. So let's see. Oh, there we go. Oops. And so there are these fairly deep divides. Access in home internet connection. Many people now, particularly in the broader world, this is certainly true in Brazil, it's, as I understand, somewhat true in Portugal, and somewhat true in the United States, that poorer people are making their primary access to the internet now on smartphones. In fact, even many people across the spectrum of education and skill use smartphones a lot because it's simply more convenient. And so, as the rector mentioned, when we try to think about how we bring people into digital education, it's interesting to think about how do we include smartphones. I teach a very large digital introductory class for my department, and I begin to realize that many of my students were listening to my lectures, participating, taking quizzes, even trying to write short essays all on their smartphones because they were more convenient. And I was trying to convince them to not try to do essays or tests on a smartphone because the phone may or may not be adequate to that. But for them, this phone is such an integrated and essential part of their lives that they try to do as many things as they can on a smartphone, even sometimes when they have a computer around. So one other thing I wanted to bring in when we're talking about where and how people access is for our poorest people and our least advantaged in the US, certainly in Brazil, and I think from what I understand in Portugal as well, many people have home access. Even among the poor people in the US, maybe 60 to 70% have access. But many of them go to public libraries, go to public centers of various kinds, homes of friends, work, other places, in order to have better access to the internet. We notice kids doing their homework in fast food restaurants, many of which have free broadband, and so people go to McDonald's or someplace literally to do their homework. Or do they go to the library, and even when the library closes, we'll see children sitting outside the door of the closed library because the Wi-Fi is still on. So many people still depend on these kinds of public access because the costs are pretty high for broadband. Particularly, one thing we notice in Austin is that when people are pushed by gentrification, as they are in Lisbon certainly, as they are in many Brazilian cities, when people are pushed away from their former neighborhoods by a process of gentrification, then frequently they are pushed to places where they no longer have public institutions like libraries to go to. And so in Austin, at least, many of the people having the worst crisis are those who've been displaced from former neighborhoods where they had libraries or community centers that they could use, and now are actually in worse conditions, on the periphery of cities. One thing I wanted to talk about for a minute is some research we've been doing, which I think is kind of innovative in examining what techno-capital or digital literacy or capability looks like. We've just finished a large study with a general sample of the city of Austin. And I hope this slide is visible to everybody, but we had from two previous surveys, we basically just looked at a fairly limited number of questions about digital literacy, whether people could use a smartphone, whether they could download apps, whether they could upload things, if they knew how to bookmark, create a profile, if they knew how to assess the accuracy of the information they were reading, which is very important, and if they knew how to use GPS or mapping software to get around. So if you look at that first factor in a factor analysis outlined by that first upper left red rectangle, in some ways we're arguing now, I think on the basis of this research, that there's a kind of basic digital literacy that many people have that permit them to do these basic things, many of which now involve smartphones as much as computers. And that many people's basic digital literacy is almost more about mobile smartphones than it is about true computer literacy. We notice a second block in the middle, a second factor, that we had something like 21 items that address different forms of literacy. And this middle block, we're calling a more advanced form of literacy that's primarily about work. People's ability to do basic tasks, to use productivity software, to do job-related skills, to look for health information, to do banking online, to detect malware or other problems. And some of that, again, some of those things also appear in just simply basic skills, but there's sort of an intermediate skill set of literacy or skills or capabilities or capitals that permit people to move into more advanced office type work. And that's something I've noticed on the economic side of all this, that many people, particularly in a city like Austin, which is becoming a city primarily driven by high tech. 30 years ago, this was a city of higher education, government, the extension of agriculture and oil industries into the city. Now it's essentially a high-tech city with a large number of both manufacturing, software, service, and other kinds of firms, all in these new digital sectors. And some of the major digital companies in America are increasing their presence here. So there's probably 10 or 15,000 open jobs that people are having a hard time filling in Austin because they don't have people with the skills they need, while we probably have, maybe 20 to 50,000 people who are unemployed or underemployed because they don't have the digital skills, this skill set that we're highlighting here in the center, to take those jobs. And then in the lower right, you can see a set of skills that are more advanced, either about dealing with digital problems like phishing or malware, or more advanced skills in creating and sharing the content that they make themselves. So one interesting thing we're finding is that what we might think of as digital literacy is now fragmenting somewhat between basic skills, which permit people to navigate society, to do a lot of basic tasks, but may not qualify them for the jobs of the future. Jobs that require more basic office skills as well as more advanced digital skills, such as actually being able to write code. One of the interesting questions here being discussed in the US is, are you fully digitally literate if you have no idea how the underlying processes, like the actual coding, work? I think that many people can work and interact profitably in digital literacy in the United States without knowing how to code, but there are people making an argument for that you're not fully literate if you don't understand how the process works. So we're expecting people to need these skills more, expecting people to simply to function as minimally literate parents. One of my favorite projects that I've been following with a team doing an ethnography in Austin is focused on, it's a very large neighborhood of recent Latino immigrants from Mexico or other parts of Latin America. So these are first generation immigrants, many with limited English. Their children, on the other hand, are growing up with both English and Spanish, going to school, but neither the parents or the children frequently know where the US economy is going, what's going to be asked of them, what kinds of education they're going to need, what kinds of skills they're going to need. And so this particular nonprofit that I've been working with is doing a wonderful job of targeting parents, essentially with parenting skills and the digital skills they need to function as parents. Their first email in the class is sending an email to their children's teachers. When they learn to use the web, they learn to use a school district software for tracking students' progress. And that to them is very exciting. And then the nonprofit also works with their children to help them set goals, to thinking out what they might want to be when they grow up and what education will be required and what digital skills they will need. So putting all those things together, I think, in a very interesting way. I think we see an interesting change now in people's motivations, the need to manage computers, the need to in some ways have the confidence in their capabilities. One of the things that we notice with a lot of people taking courses or going to libraries to seek help among our least educated and least advantaged people is that they feel stupid compared to the rest of society. I'm working, in fact, with a former student of ours who lives in Lisbon, Claudia Silva, who worked with this nonprofit while she was studying in Austin with me. And we're publishing a paper this month called Yo soy la única burra. I feel like I'm the only stupid one. And a working class Latina housewife who had no skills, even though other people in her family were learning about computers, learning about the internet. And she began to feel not only disadvantaged, but somehow incapable, even mentally incapable, which is, I think, a real danger in our highly digitized societies, that the people being excluded now feel much worse than people in their same social class might have felt 30 years ago, before these technologies were so pervasive. There are a lot of benefits, including these kind of psychological ones. The need to hunt for a job, something I wanted to talk about to kind of conclude this. Let's see if I can get my computer to advance. Okay, one of the things I notice, to kind of wrap up the talk so we can have a bit more of a dialogue, is that I see two new modalities of digital inclusion and digital literacy. One is that people start with their mobiles and they become digitally literate one application or one app at a time, frequently starting with things like GPS that they need for work, picking up things like WhatsApp so that they can have a basic social network, even if they don't have a computer or other things to let them at. Then typically they move into Facebook, email, other things, learning games. And I see this as a very, very much a pattern of working class people or poor people in Austin, but it's becoming a very global pattern. The people in rural Brazil probably don't have the wherewithal to look at Facebook, but they have WhatsApp. And so we're beginning to see a blurring of what is the internet. Does someone with a non-smartphone, but a plan that gives them WhatsApp, are they using the internet? Not technically, but they are now involved in digital society and becoming increasingly digitally literate through their phones, and probably increasingly pushing their budgets, pushing their skills to where they can get to where they actually have internet access. The other mode I see in Austin is very crisis driven. People needing to find a library where their children can do their homework. Youth whose parents don't have the internet, who go get their own phones and get their own data plans so that they can be online. And skip ahead. The mobiles, I think, in many ways can be a bridge. One of the things I've noticed with several nonprofits that I work with here in town is that people come to a training session in a room full of computers, but they bring their smartphone along and set it down next to the computer and begin to try to take what they know from the smartphone and pass it to the computer, and vice versa. I've seen, again, particularly the program that Claudia Silva and I were involved with, where there's a training for working class women and they learn on laptops, and they're then given a Chromebook laptop, which they can take home. But what really ends up happening is that they learn new skills that they then take back to their mobiles, and they still use the mobile more than the laptop. And the laptop may be incorporated in their lives only slowly. So we have this problem for children who are becoming included via their phones. We also have a huge crisis for low-income adults who, this seems like to me an unbelievable scenario, but to get a job at McDonald's in Austin, one has to apply online. McDonald's tells the person to go to the public library, have them help him get online so he can then apply for a very low-end service job to work at McDonald's. And so we have a crisis of where do people go to do the things that either government services demand of them or applications for jobs demand of them. And they're frequently not, particularly older adults, are not prepared for that. And they need help someplace, putting a resume together, learning how to go online and make a job application. So I kind of see, we continue to try to push people into training seminars so they learn how to use a computer, learn how to use the internet. But what many people need the most is learning how to do more with their phone and having some place they can go when they have a crisis and absolutely have to do something online. And So the program we'd been working with the poorest people here was trying to get connectivity, which is being provided by Google Fiber, trying to get training, trying to get a device for them. But in many ways, even all of that leaves people still uncertain, and they need ongoing training. So, and I guess one last thought is because the United States is very much an immigrant society, and Portugal, Brazil, many places take in immigrants. And the immigrants frequently are in the least advantaged situation. And we've noticed a pattern. In fact, there's a sociologist who's been talking for 20 years now about how there's a segmented assimilation. Some people come in who might have had education in a previous country, but don't manage to use that education here, or the qualifications don't match up, and they're actually assimilated downward into a lower social class. And I'm seeing an analogy for digital assimilation, both of poor youth, poor parents, particularly those who are immigrants, and many of them come to the US and are in danger of actually being assimilated into poverty, where they might then get into gangs, get into trouble, or at least into a working class situation that they might have been able to do better by. And so one of the challenges I'm trying to think through is, how do we avoid segmented digital assimilation, where working class and poor youth learn some digital skills, but only to entertain themselves? I mean, I see a lot of kids now who are digitally included to the point of knowing how to play games, knowing how to get on Facebook, but not digitally literate to where they now know how to participate in society civically, or to participate in society economically, to move into the kind of educational opportunities that exist that could move them upwards in society, but they may not have the digital skills or both digital and broader knowledge to do that. All right, so that's kind of about where I want to conclude, I think. So let's give people a chance to ask some questions, to see what your thoughts are.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Straubhaar. Now I'd like to invite the webinar attendees for the discussion, and I would like to share some information for those who came a little bit later. At the bottom of the window, you will find a chat button called Bate-Papo, and then you will find a bar on the right side that allows you to send questions to Professor Straubhaar. Ricardo, can you help me to manage the questions, please?
Yes, of course. Okay.
Portanto, os colegas, os participantes que queiram apresentar questões ao professor Straubhaar, por favor, digitem as vossas perguntas no chat. O professor Straubhaar também está a acompanhar as mensagens que estão a ser, ou os comentários que possam vir a ser publicados. Portanto, fiquem à vontade, comentários provocadores, perguntas que sejam desafiantes. Esta oportunidade é única e, portanto, creio que o professor Straubhaar terá todo o gosto em comentar e em responder dar resposta às vossas perguntas e provocações.
Okay, hello, Ricardo.
Good afternoon. Congratulations for your presentation. It's a very nice study that you are doing there in Austin. There are similar questions that we are studying here also in Portugal and in the Basque Country. And I would like to have a closer look to your study. Is it published already?
Yeah, we have several publications. Let's see, there's, in fact, maybe one of the things that I can arrange with Luisa is to have like a Dropbox file or something where we put some publications.
Okay,
That would be
Yeah, that would
great.
be a good idea, I think, because, in fact, let me clarify something. Because in the presentation, I was mixing several studies. So what I'll put in the Dropbox are some some results from older studies that we've done that were surveys of the whole city of Austin. So we have one from 2011, one from 2014, and then the preliminary results of one that we're just finishing now. And so I'll put all of those in the Dropbox, but then I'll also put a report from, many of the slides were actually from a study done with the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, called HACA, if you'll see that acronym.
Yeah.
Put it in there. And that's the one with the poorest of the poor. And then we're also getting papers done from this ethnographic study with that I mentioned with Claudia Silva. So we have several papers written from that are in different processes of publication. So I will, and there are also some other published papers. So I'll try to pull in some of the published papers, kind of the reports on the studies, and put them in a, in fact, let me see what I'll probably do. I'll create a drop, is a Dropbox file okay for everybody? Is that a useful technology?
Yes.
Okay. So how about I create a Dropbox file and invite Luisa, and then she can invite everybody else.
Excellent, Professor. It's an excellent idea.
Okay, so because I have a lot of this stuff in Dropbox already, so it's just a question of moving it around to the right places.
Thank you. Preguntas? Professor, I would like to ask you, what kind of local initiatives do you need at this moment to promote digital citizenship? Because you talk about the urgency to rethink the intervention, and we can find some specific policies, but the idea, I think that those small policies, in fact, don't solve the most important or most urgent problems that you mentioned here today. And so I would like, we are very worried with a digital agenda that could solve some basic problems. In your point of view and from your experience in Austin, Brazil, and some experience also in Portugal, in your point of view, what are the priorities at this moment? Please.
Yeah, I mean, so I would think that I would argue that there's probably half a dozen things that need to be done. One is simply kind of regulatory reform with companies so that mobile broadband becomes more accessible. Because for a lot of poor people in the foreseeable future, their access to the digital world is going to be, a low-end smartphone and hopefully an accessible data plan. That's true in Brazil, where mobile broadband is very expensive, and so a lot of people are kind of working at the very low end with a regular phone, not a smartphone, and maybe a few things like WhatsApp or other really basic things. So I mean, there are things that almost everybody who has a phone now are beginning to be able to do. So we need to make the conditions for that phone use better, to have actual mobile broadband rather than simply minimal access to things like WhatsApp. But even there, one thing I notice here is that as people begin to get that kind of access, they frequently don't know what to do with it. And like we've noticed, not so much in Brazil or Latin America or even, well, somewhat in Africa, there's a huge problem in South and Southeast Asia now that as people get this sort of minimal access with very little literacy, horrible things happen. They use it to promote ethnic cleansing. There are massacres that have been encouraged by Facebook and by WhatsApp as people get access with no literacy whatsoever, no ability to judge what's accurate or not. So I think we're going to have a bit of a crisis as people acquire minimal access with no literacy whatsoever. Not literal literacy, knowing how to read, and not technological literacy, knowing what to make of a video that you get on WhatsApp. And so I think there needs to be a pretty substantial, broad literacy campaign. Just here's what these things mean. When you see this, here's how to interpret it. You know, and this has been part of digital or media literacy for a long time. How to assess accuracy, how to understand what you see. And so I think that is, you know, maybe the most urgent thing. I think at another level, we need a lot more community centers and library-based facilities where people can go when they have, you know, some kind of economic or government service crisis and they just need help. I mean, because that's a pattern I see repeatedly here. We expect people to be able to navigate these things on their own, and the poorest and the least educated are not up to that. So we need to have a place where they can go when they have a crisis to get help. So I think in many ways those are the urgent things. I think the ideal scenario is probably this one that I described as, in fact, I should give you the name of it. It's called the River City Youth Foundation. And the big Latino neighborhood it works in is called Dove Springs. So when you look through the Dropbox file, you'll see references to that. And, you know, on a very low budget, among very poor people with minimal literacy, they're doing quite a great job. I mean, they have some full-time staff, they have a facility, they're pretty much always there. People can go and ask them questions. And they're sponsored primarily by a couple of corporations, Dell Corporation and Google. The city has a couple of equivalent programs of its own, some based in community centers, some based in libraries. And people know they can go there and people will walk them through the crisis that they're having. And so I think those kind of things are to deal with crises, literally. I think beyond that, we need simply a lot more digital skills training, but ideally that digital skills training comes with elements of literacy so that we address that problem of how to understand the accuracy of information. I mean, I think most Americans now are kind of appalled at how many people were taken in by false information in 2016. And that includes people with reasonable levels of education, people who might have learned about digital technology at one point or another. But I mean, the ability of people to deceive and put false information, and some of it was literally about the election, but some of it was simply designed to break down American society by making racial groups hostile to each other, by making political parties more hostile to each other. So I think we're unfortunately trying to build up digital literacy when people are making fairly sophisticated negative use of digital technologies. I mean, this American election may have been a dramatic example, but people intervened in the French election and the Greek election. I mean, there's this, you know, outside parties intervening digitally through social media at time of election is not going to be an American problem only. It will be, I think, I'm kind of very worried about this, the ability of people to take advantage of illiteracy to try to manipulate people. I mean, that's not a problem we worried about 4 years ago. We were dealing with more basic problems. Now, unfortunately, we have to deal with kind of fairly sophisticated, you know, manipulation aimed at people with minimal literacy. And it's not always by Russians. It could be simply a group in the United States that's against black people having greater rights. And we have racist groups that make these kinds of interventions to try to stir up racial issues. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. I mean, and I think there will be similar things in various countries. They may take other forms, but I think increasingly people are going to discover that they can attempt to manipulate people through social media and other digital tools. So I think suddenly now digital literacy, both skills and critical understanding, are suddenly really essential. In fact, it's interesting, in the US at least, we now see a lot more disciplines, a lot more companies beginning to worry about this. So people in the university who never talked about this are talking about it. People at Facebook are beginning to realize they have a responsibility and a problem. And so I think to some degree, all of this is raising consciousness. But, you know, it's rather sad that we now have new digital problems that are artificially created.
Professor,
but we have to cope with them.
And what about the public internet access places? Are they still relevant to access and to promote digital competencies?
Yeah, I think for both of those reasons. I mean, I always get frustrated with many Americans who act as though the internet is already universal and that some minimal digital literacy is already universal. I think a lot of middle or upper middle class people simply don't run into the people who don't have access and don't have literacy. So we broadly defined underestimate the problem. But no, I'm friends with Brasilina Passarelli in Sao Paulo, who runs this enormous network of access centers for the state of Sao Paulo. And unfortunately, the state now thinks that they can afford to cut back on those, which is a terrible idea. Just like states and localities in the US are beginning to say, well, isn't this a place where we can save money? Do we still need these? And from my point of view, given what I've seen in Sao Paulo working with Brasilina, what I see in Austin and other places in the US, these centers are perhaps more necessary now than ever. In fact, the new thing that makes them imperative in the United States is what we're calling the homework gap. The fact that poor children, maybe 20-25% of school children in the US, absolutely need these facilities, not only just to get access, but also to have some place they can ask questions. How do I do this? So and also like, what does this mean? You know, what's on my screen here? How do I interpret this thing? So, I mean, a lot of times the kids will go to these places to entertain themselves, but that's not necessarily bad. They're also learning skills.
Joana, José Azevedo, Ricardo, Luísa, Susana Henriques, Carlos Medinas, Vinzi, querem apresentar alguma questão? Alberto, que está em Catalunha. Alguma pergunta ao professor Straubhaar? Estamos a chegar ao limite do nosso tempo.
Hey, Ricardo seems to have a question. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We have with us a team from the Lisbon municipality. They are assisting to the conference. They just write a question.
Oh, good.
Yes, they are doing a great job in a neighborhood of Lisbon called Marvila, and they are assisting now. It's Engineera Luisa, Elder, and Vanessa, and they work in digital literacy. They give courses for people that don't have internet access and no neither skills, and they are doing a great job. And they are saying that they feel need to address smartphones more and more in every little digital literacy training courses that they provide also. And they congratulate you for the conference.
I totally support them. I think when I look again at this one that I've been studying closely, the River City Youth Foundation, I mean, when they see the poor people come in and put the phone by the computer, and then try to leverage their knowledge of both together, I mean, so I've been urging them, okay, just, switch your training focus a little bit and teach both. When people are in the room learning on the computers, also say, well, and here's how you do this on your phone. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. Because a lot of people come in knowing how to do things on their phone, and the courses will go much better if you say, okay, how many of you know how to do email on your phone? Great. Here's how you do email on the computer. Here are the things that are similar, here are the things that are different. So yeah, I think pretty much anybody doing training with particularly lower income people kind of needs to train in both now. And when they come in the door, you could expect a question about either or both. So that's great. I'm glad that they're doing that. And what we don't have, actually, curiously enough, is a lot of material. People have been developing material for years on how to train people with computers. An interesting challenge right now is to say, okay, how do we extend this into the people who are sort of somewhat familiar with what to do on a phone and kind of want to learn both. I mean, it was fascinating to be in this study with Claudia Silva, who actually lives in Lisbon. You guys should get her involved. She is, I think is finishing a postdoc with an institute on
education.
Yeah, yeah. She was based in Madeira, is now based in Lisbon, but is finishing her postdoc and looking for other projects, I think. And she worked full time with this organization in Austin for a couple of years, doing her dissertation work, and I think has some very good background knowledge on all of this. So she would be a very good person to connect with. In fact, I will give you her email, and you can put the people in touch with her. But I think what she found is that women would get a laptop. For finishing the course, they would give people a laptop. They would take the laptop home, but then they didn't always have connectivity at home, and the laptop would go into a cupboard, and then they would keep on using their phone. And the other factor is that their friends used phones, and so there's sort of, in Bourdieuian terms, a habitus about how to use the phone, but not really a habitus about how to use the laptop. And so even women who've just been trained in how to use the laptop may well go back to using the phone because that's where they feel more comfortable, and that's what their friends are doing. And so, again, sort of, I think helping people learn both. And then what happens with a lot of these women is that then their children will want to use the laptop, and then they'll, to some degree, maybe if they're lucky, get some continuing education from their children. Because one training course and a laptop don't make you competent. You're going to have questions. You're going to forget things. There's a need for kind of an ongoing support. And we discovered that with both the Housing Authority research and with this nonprofit. People would take a training, get a computer, take it home, and then forget how to sign on or forget their email address. Because, so we sort of need an outreach component to this. Here's a training, that's great, but then come back and talk to us when you have questions.
Thank you. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Comentários? Muito obrigada, engenheira Luisa. É um gosto tê-la conosco.
Okay.
Okay. Well, acho que não há mais perguntas, professor Straubhaar.
Ok, tá bem. Mas eu vou completar, eu vou mesmo criar este Dropbox e providenciar o e-mail da Cláudia, essas outras coisas de follow-up. E se pessoas têm mais perguntas, podem me enviar correios eletrônicos.
Muito obrigada. Thank you, Professor Straubhaar, for your excellent presentation and your comments, and for being with us today.
For sure, my pleasure.
Wish you a speedy recovery.
Well, thank you, yeah. If she didn't tell you, I just had cataract operations on my eyes, so looking at screens is still a little strange.
Okay, thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye, and thank you. Bye-bye.